Carlos Saisu with ESPN LA, and I'm excited with you on the road to recovery with our man, Dr. Alan Beyer of the Hoag Orthopedic Institute. Dr. Beyer, hope you've been having a great week. It's time to pickleball, and I have a feeling it's a big deal to you.
Pickleball been very good to me. I'll start it all by saying that. I mean, we see it a lot of pickleball injuries. Fortunately it's not terribly serious injuries. I mean, the most serious is probably the Achilles tendon tears that we tend to see with some frequency in pickleball. The others that are kind of common are wrist injuries from people tripping and falling and sticking out their hand to break their fall so they fracture their wrist. That's actually pretty common in pickleball. Not as many eye injuries as I was worried we'd see, but I do tell people they should wear goggles. But it's, you know what? I'm of the school that says anything that gets you out there, getting off the couch, doing something, moving, motion, using your body in a physical way is overall in the big picture of things good for you. Damn the risks. It's good for you to do it. I just really feel that very strongly.
Activity is always better. And the reason why we're taking a big bite out of pickleball is over here at ESPN LA, we got a big event coming up. It's a Saturday, March 23rd, 10 a.m. at the Agape Pickleball Center at Miles Square Park, not far from you, Doc, in Fountain Valley. And our second annual pickleball tournament, Pickleball Madness. More info at espnla.com. Doc, you mentioned Achilles injury. Ironically, last year, right in front of me, there was the one injury that we had in our inaugural tournament, and the player grabbed his calf, his lower calf, and I was just fearing that he was going to say Achilles. He said something popped, and I yelled out, "Is there a doctor in the house?" And sadly, it was the player who raised his
He was
hand.
the
He was the
doctor.
doctor.
Shame on him.
Oh,
Shame on him. He probably didn't stretch enough.
what preventative measures can players take to avoid these kind of injuries in pickleball?
Well, I think especially because the demographic that tends to play pickleball is a little bit older demographic than we see in so many other sports, the stretching becomes more important. As we get older and older, our tendons and muscles tend to tighten up and shrink. And that's why stretching for people over the age of 40 or 45, well, heck, even a 20-year-old or 30-year-old basketball or football player, you see them out on the field before their game stretching. I think that it can't be emphasized enough. And I think that people just need to incorporate not a half an hour, but certainly 5 to 10 minutes of a gentle stretch of your major lower extremity musculature, maybe your shoulders a little bit as well. And it's going to serve you in good stead. A, you're going to play better because you're going to be able to move better. You're warmed up a little bit. And B, it's going to significantly decrease the incidence of you injuring one of those body parts. So I can't say enough about stretching. Now, for years, I've been joking and saying that before you can go and play 18 holes of golf or before you go and play tennis, take a couple of Advil, and that's kind of like medical stretching. There is something to that. I think that if people have some generalized body aches and pains, they're 50, they're 60, they've got a little bit of arthritis in a couple of their joints, taking a couple of oral anti-inflammatories before you do the activity is not a terrible strategy either.
Dr. B, you and I have talked about pickleball before offhand, and I found it very, very interesting that you referred to pickleball, the sport, or is it the injuries that come from it, as an epidemic. Why did you use the word epidemic?
Well, we're seeing a huge explosion in the number of injuries because, quite frankly, in the last 2 to 3 years, pickleball has absolutely zoomed in terms of the number of participants who are doing it. So it's not that the injuries are more common, just more people are doing it. So the chances of seeing these injuries is much, much higher, and we see a lot more of them. But again, I stress, I'd rather see these people out there doing something and taking the chance of hurting their wrist or spraining their knee, but they're out there being active because in the long term, in terms of their general well-being and their longevity, they're going to be better off having done it than they just said, "Nah, I'm not going to do that. There's too big a chance I'm going to get hurt."
Doc, again, I love that you promote activity. We've seen all the stats. Pickleball, it's known as the fastest growing sport in America, but it's led to a 200% increase in injuries in the last 2 decades. And I was shocked to see it. Americans are really spending almost $400 million in medical costs coming out of pickleball. I mean, how do you measure those numbers compared to, like you mentioned, the fact that Americans are at least staying active, especially at the age over 50?
I really think that that statistic is a very one-sided viewpoint of looking at something. Just how many wrist fractures, how many Achilles injuries, how many, any injuries showed up at the ER because of pickleball being the cause. It does not take into account how much better are these people doing in terms of their generalized health. How much better is their diabetes being controlled? How much lower is the incidence of heart attacks and strokes and things that happen in people who are sedentary and don't do activity? It doesn't take that into account at all. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I'll bet that's at least a neutral equation. And I have a feeling that it's probably a net positive equation in terms of the benefits of that exercise outweighing the cost to society of the injuries sustained in that exercise.
I love how you say neutral because isn't that a good thing in the medical world when things are neutral and you're just maintaining your body?
Well, the older I get in life, the more I realize anything that's neutral is a good thing. If it's even on both sides, hey, that's a win for both sides, right?
Is there such thing as being too old to play pickleball?
I don't think so. I think as long as you're playing against appropriate opponents. I mean, I wouldn't want to see an 80-year-old out there against a 30-year-old. That's probably not a neutral situation. Okay. I think as long as, and the social aspects, we forget COVID wasn't that long ago. We forget how socially deprived we all were during COVID and how difficult that was. The social aspects of a game like pickleball, where people are out there, they play a game, they step to the sideline, they have a little snack, maybe they have a little glass of wine. Fine, okay. Um, it's a social activity. And I think we need social activities too, not just physical sporting activities. We're human animals. We need social interaction. And anything that you can do, especially as you get older, to increase your social interaction is probably going to make you mentally more fit, not just physically more fit.
Yeah, I know, Doc. You mentioned the pandemic. A lot of Americans thought pickleball was invented in the last 5, 10 years, especially the rise during the pandemic. But in fact, pickleball has been over and around for about half a century. It's
It
been around.
it has been. It's an offshoot of a lot of other racket sports that we've seen over the years. Racquetball, squash, even badminton. But it appeals to the masses. It's not expensive to get started. There's not a big investment in equipment. Um, and there's more and more availability of courts to play on, both indoor and outdoor. I've seen a couple of reports where some of these big box stores and malls that went out of business during COVID have been converted to indoor pickleball facilities. And they're lovely. I mean, the rent's cheap, the landlord loves it. He doesn't have to do a lot of tenant improvements. And it gives the people, especially people who are in the East Coast where you can't play outdoors all year long, gives them a place to do it.
Along with that, Doc, I'm curious if you've seen a rise, just like pickleball injuries. Have you seen other injuries with tennis related sports like uh, badminton, like you mentioned, racquetball?
I actually think we're seeing less participation in those sports now than we used to see. It's harder to find opponents because so many of them have morphed over to pickleball. You always see a little bit of a spike of some of these activities, like badminton, for instance, when the Olympics come, because it's still an Olympic sport. So there's always a spike in any sport that's featured in the Olympics, which is going to be in Paris this July. But I think those other racket sports are actually decreasing in popularity as pickleball becomes more um, for the masses. And I think pickleball, of all of those sports, is the best suited for people as they reach their 50s, 60s, and 70s.
I think that's a great piece of advice for a lot of elders that are looking to get more active after hanging out with us on the road to recovery. Dr. Beyer, before we leave, how about one more piece of advice? What would you advise first time pickleball players who are considering about entering the sport?
So, like any athletic activity, equipment is important. Don't just go out in a beat up pair of crew shoes. Get appropriate footwear for the court because that's going to ensure your ability to not sustain these slips and falls that people have if they're not wearing appropriate shoes. Get an appropriate racket. I think when you start any sport, to go out and buy the $400 or $500 professional racket is probably not money well spent. I mean, pick up a nice middle of the road racket, and I always advise people to wear goggles too, because I think any sport where there's a projectile like a ball, and you're close to the net, there's a lot of volleying that goes on in pickleball. I think that the eyes are at risk, and I think that wearing goggles, as much as they don't appeal to a lot of people's vanity, I think wearing goggles for pickleball is probably not a bad play as well.
Well, Dr. Beyer, thanks a lot for spending all your time with us. We appreciate you always. And I have a feeling you're going to be having fun on the green soon.
Well, I am. Hogue Classic is next week. Actually, it's coinciding with your tournament, March 22nd to 24th at Newport Beach Country Club. Come out and see the Champions Tour. It's always a ton of fun, and it's for a great cause at Hogue Hospital. And we'll be back on the air with Doctor in the Dugout first weekend in April, 12 noon on Saturdays on AM 830, home of the Angels, when they're back from Tempe. So listen for us then, and you and I, I'm sure, will be hooking up before that.
Looking forward to it, Doc. Thanks a lot for joining us on the road to recovery.